So we met Georgia in Northern Ireland in Belfast at the rental car agency. She was youngish, like 25, 27, maybe kind of the age of our two younger boys, and she was in charge, and she was stressed. There were not enough cars, and there were a lot of people wanting a car, and our car hadn't been returned. She was really apologetic. She was like, I could make it up to you by giving you a ride tomorrow to the ferry. Joe had asked her, how do we get to the ferry to go to Scotland? So the next day when we returned the car, sure enough, there were more people, more impatient people, more stress. She'd give me a minute, I'll get out here and give you a ride. So we ended up having like 25 minutes with this young woman in the car, and I wanted to know, how do you identify? Do you tell people you're from Ireland or Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, this and that? And then she was talking about just the shortage of everything. And Joe kind of asked her, does it seem to be related to Brexit? How's the economy? And she said, I don't know if it's related to that vote, but everything is so expensive and in such short supply. And she said, she used the word extortion to talk about the prices. And she was talking about how it was impossible to afford anything. And like no young person could ever imagine buying a home or starting a family. And she said, I'm really lucky because my parents actually had a house they inherited. But still, there's like no work-life balance. She said, I work 6.5 days a week, and I can't really get my life started, can't even begin. And I asked her, do you have any friends that are leaving, that are still immigrating out of the country? And she took a deep breath and she said, I am. I'm leaving next month for Australia. She said, I'm really fortunate. My parents immigrated twice when we were little. So she said, I have an Australian passport. She said, I'm going to backpack across the country for a while and then try to get my career started. She said, I'm lucky. I've got a friend whose dad has a place I can stay so I don't have to pay rent for a while. And I asked her, are you sad about leaving? Because you could feel this hope and determination, but also this heaviness. And she said, not yes and no. She said, the last 3 years have been really hard since I got out of school. She said, my mom died, then I've been dealing with a diabetes diagnosis, and then there was a boyfriend in Dublin, no more. And, we talked a little bit more. We wished her well. But I kept thinking about her. This beautiful young woman. And it was just like Joe and I were like, it's like this everywhere, all over the world, right? I've never imagined a time when the economy would be so skewed against the young folks. I mean, everything that young folks really need, education, home, childcare, just impossible. And that sense of loss that you could feel in her, it's certainly not just young folks, right, that are struggling. I mean, the crazy right-wing stuff, some of that is absolutely unresolved grief and loss, that the world has changed, that the manufacturing jobs are gone, that the family farm is gone, that you can't make it, and that just turns exploited against like people of color and immigrants and women, right? But then all of us, kind of in the middle to the left, the loss we feel about this country that once was, right? Like, I've been out of the country a number of times, even in January, before the inauguration. This was different. We didn't look at the headlines. We didn't carry our phones. We tried to stay away from it. There was no escaping it. Just the sadness and the loss of this country and what it's become and all of it. And yet that's also totally universal to the human experience, just totally universal to trying to figure out how do you move forward and make it. And it's a developmental thing. Scholars will tell you it's part of it's like understanding you have agency in the world. So little kids think of themselves as an actor. They think of themselves as, I'm playing the role of little sister or little brother or friend. You get a little older, you get a little stronger, and you start realizing you're not just playing a role, you're writing a script. You have agency in how your life unfolds. That's important as a healthy person. But part of that agency is also figuring out how are you going to deal with the loss in your life. And we kind of go through life, we have losses, and there are two kinds of stories that people tend to tell. One of them is a contamination story, and that kind of goes like this. My life was perfect, I had a wonderful family, my husband had an affair with the secretary, he left, it's been 12 years, I'm alone, I'll never find anybody. And the other story is a redemption story. I had a great job at the bank, I loved it, I thought I'd retire, I got let go. I was moping around in my house. My neighbor asked me if I could come help build some cabinets. I used to work with my grandfather in his wood shop, and I got going on it. I realized I had a knack for it. Now I build cabinets. I've never been happier in my life. People who tell redemptive stories are a lot mental healthier, right? And that's a skill you have to work at, you know. Part of that, again, is taking agency, is seeing our role as shaping our life. You know, that Mary Oliver line in one of her poems or books, never ever give up the responsibility of your life to anyone else, right? It's like we have this power. And you see that even in this little parable where God shows up as this keeper of the house. She is honest. I lost the coin. She says that 2 times, which is different. The sheep wanders off, the prodigal son at the end of this story. Those 2 different parables that frame it, it's more like the sheep got lost and the son got lost. But here, this woman claims what she has done. She's lost the coin, and it's an interesting little parable because unlike the 2 parables that frame it with the sheep and the younger son, a coin really doesn't have any value. I mean, it's really kind of meaningless, except it's a part of a set. She had 10 coins and she's lost 1. It's like you have a deck of cards, you lose 1 card, you know, the deck's no good. And which is a lot like loss too, right? Because you lose a son, you lose something really important to you, and it changes the whole family, it changes the set. So that's why that kind of a loss is so difficult, because it's trying to figure out how do we put back together who we are. So there's this woman here who's had these 10 coins. She's lost 1. She takes responsibility. She says, I am going to light the lamp, sweep the house diligently until I find it. There's her agency. And then when she finds the coin, she rejoices and she calls her neighbors and her friends together and she has a celebration. And that's kind of the second thing about dealing with loss, kind of taking responsibility. But highly generative people, when they tell their life stories, also give credit to all the other people who helped them recover. So it's like Georgia, right? We were in the little car ride with her. She told her story. I mean, she was leaving. She couldn't make it. No work-life balance. She's going to Australia. And she was also really clear. She was lucky she had parents, grandparents, a family member who could come and help her, right? So there's this kind of understanding of how we move through life is kind of like living out of our best self, but then also realizing we're dependent on those around us, which is why it's so hard for some people to like pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? Not everybody has this community of support. You know, people who have been impoverished in this world don't have these huge networks of parents who can help them. And anybody who's got young adults, raise your hand if you have not helped them, right? I mean, it's just a constant trying to help people make it. In ancient Ireland and Scotland, one of the people that people looked to was this Celtic saint named Bridget. And Bridget actually finally got her own public holiday in Ireland in 2023. So now February 1, another good excuse to go out and drink to celebrate Bridget's Day. But Bridget you don't really need an excuse to drink in Ireland or Scotland. But anyway, if you need another one, there's Bridget. Bridget was really a Celtic saint. She was kind of, an earthy saint before the church came over and kind of took her over and made her their saint. She was allegedly born in like the 400s in the little town of Kildare in Ireland, and she was known not as some saint far away in the heavens, but as this kind of earthy saint who was in the rivers and the forests and the trees. And she was very dedicated to the poor, so she would share her family's butter and cheese with the poor, and she would share beer with the poor. Like whenever people ran out of beer, then she would take water and make it into more beer. She was a very popular saint. And she also, though, was of her own mind. Once she took her father's bejeweled dagger and gave it to a beggar, and her father went to the king and complained. She acts without even asking for permission, right? So she was just this own person, this Bridget character. But she was mainly known as this kind of saint who helped you give birth, who helped you move from the old to the new. So the legend, even though she was born in 5th century Ireland, was that she was the midwife at Jesus' birth in Palestine. So there's this beautiful, beautiful painting, and like the museum in Edinburgh where these saints and animals are carrying her across the ocean to Palestine. But she was the barmaid in Bethlehem, and when the holy couple came, and then they were out in the barn, she goes out there and she delivers the baby, and then she puts him on her breast. So she's not just the midwife of the Christ child, she's also his wet nurse. And so she became this character that people prayed to when they were giving birth, which in old traditional homes, which were one-room homes, I've even heard this on the prairie here, women would often give birth on the threshold because they had, two different walls they could press again with their limbs, and then the midwife would be on the other side to receive the baby. So she became really this figure that you pray to when you're on the threshold. And I've been thinking about that lately because it's a tough time, and like, how do we kind of process the stuff that's going on right now and not get bogged down in it, name it. Like I've said, sometimes it's good on your morning run to just name what's been lost. Gaza, right? Haiti. All the loss, and just name it. And then how do we move on, and how do we process it? And who are the bridges in our life that kind of help us make that transition? There's been a lot of talk this week about political violence, and a lot of mourning about it. My daughter has posted quite a bit about those who've been lost, and this week, in particular, Melissa Hortman. 3 months ago today, on June 14th, Melissa, who was the Speaker of the House for 6 years in Minnesota, she and her husband were shot, killed by a crazy man with too much guns who was after anybody who was pro-choice. And they came for her, killed her and her husband, the dog. He shot 2 other people in the Minnesota House, and had a long list of people he was going after who were reproductive justice advocates. 3 months ago, this very day, she was one of the most remarkable Americans ever. Seriously, she was 55. She was a devoted Catholic, Sunday school teacher, Girl Scout leader, absolutely committed to the environment. She actually wrote the solar energy policy that's very forward-thinking for the state of Minnesota, pushed it forward. She was an incredible advocate for the environment, incredible advocate for LGBTQ rights, for marriage equality, for reproductive choice, for transportation, for energy, for K through 12 education. And she was brilliant. She had a law degree from Harvard, and she was kind. She was absolutely kind. She was a Democrat, but she worked across the aisle. She did so much to try to bring that state together. And after her death, people were like, generations of Minnesotans will be better off because of her work, because of what she did. So I've been thinking about her. I've been thinking about the Bridgets in the world, the Georges in the world, the Melissa Hortmans in the world. And I've been thinking, what would Melissa Hortman do if she were here right now? Well, for one thing, if she were in Missouri, she'd have those signature sheets, and she'd be out getting signatures to challenge the gerrymandering, right? And if she were on the Kansas side with our state senator, Cindy Holscher, she'd be doing everything she could to defend K through 12 education. And so how do we think about these people who've gone before? And I don't know so much about praying to saints and all that, but how do we think about the people whose strength is right there for us to access, for us to kind of try to draw on that energy and meet the moment again with our best self. So in this time where we keep struggling with this country, trying to figure out where we're going to come out on it, when we have our own stuff, people losing jobs in our own congregation and trying to find the new way forward, may we find the strength to draw on those people who have gone before, who have called us to believe in a different day, and a day when finally this divine sacred spirit will keep seeking us out and find a way to bring us home. Amen.